I have been running the adventure Light of Xaraxis from the Spelljammer box set, and I really like the adventure a lot. I've had my criticisms about the Spelljammer box set, mostly that I would have preferred a lot more setting material than it had, but I have been enjoying the adventure. It's a really straightforward, episodic adventure, kind of deep space fun D&D stuff. My players have been enjoying it. I've been enjoying it. I've liked the story as it's evolved. I wasn't totally crazy with like the final couple of chapters. We're actually coming up to the final game. The final session is going to be coming up in a couple of weeks for that game for me. And one of the things I did that I really enjoyed and wanted to share is this idea of a Mass Effect style prelude to war. So in the video game series Mass Effect, there's Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. There are a couple of aspects from Mass Effect that I grabbed onto and I used in my Light of Xaraxis game that I think you can actually use in other role-playing games too, and I wanted to share them. So one example is when you have a game where you have a bunch of different NPCs that the characters have met and have been introduced to, and some of them come in and some of them fade away, but you're keeping track of these NPCs. When you're starting to get close to the end of your game, it's kind of fun to have sort of a prelude to war where all of the NPCs have an opportunity to get back together and the players have an opportunity to interact with them once again. In the game Mass Effect 3, I think it was actually an added patch. They had an event where they had sort of a garden party, some kind of big event where all of the NPCs that you'd been with and that you'd connected with throughout 3 games got together and talked to you, and you could have these final conversations with them and sort of tie off any loose ends, finish the last sort of discussions that you have this final bit of closure with each of the NPCs before you go right into the final battle, before everything goes in the directions, and potentially before they all die. In my Light of Xaraxis game, I actually did this, right? A bunch of NPCs that are on the ship. I had a scene where sort of they had the opportunity to talk to all these NPCs, and I gave each of the NPCs a little hook, a little reason to talk to one of the characters, so that while the characters were kind of finishing up and getting ready and doing their stuff, the NPCs were coming to them, or the characters would run into the NPCs. And I had fun things like 2 characters that were, a former couple got back together again, and the players sort of saw that happen. One of the NPCs would come to the characters and give them a gift. Lots of different things that I did to get the NPCs to sort of reconnect with the characters and give the players the option to connect back to them. And I made it clear to the players, like, as you're kind of interacting with these NPCs, this might be the last time you see them. Even if the war goes in a good direction, it might be the last time that you're really going to connect with all of these people again. So it gave them an opportunity to kind of choose which ones they wanted to role play with, choose which ones they wanted to talk to, and that really worked well. Then the other part of it was actually creating the war, in which case, in this part, we had many, many different spell-jamming ships that were invading the Xaraxis the Xaraxis Citadel, and all of the Xaraxian ships were coming the other direction. There was this great big war, and it's like a lot of people are really looking for like a heavy mechanics way, and actually the book has a tiny little bit of like how to figure out which ships are getting destroyed and which ships are not, and I wanted to handle most of that in the narrative. But the one part that I thought was really important was deciding which of those NPCs might be at risk and which of them might die. And what I did is I said, basically, there are 3 different specific missions that the characters can go on during this war. All 3 of them have different advantages. One of them might be getting ahead of the villains to get to the Temple of Light before the villains can fully set up a defense of the place. Another one is rescuing another NPC who has been captured and might be sacrificed before they manage to get there to save them. And a third would be like destroying the command ship to disrupt the organization of the enemy side. And the dirty trick is they can only do 2 of them. So instead of being able to do all 3 missions and solve all 3 problems, they have to choose which 2 they're going to do. Do they want to get ahead of the enemy on the defense? Do they want to rescue somebody on the other side? Or do they want to disrupt what's going on in the capital? They want to disrupt the capital ship and disrupt the enemy action. Particularly that last one had an effect on how many of their NPCs that they have been interacting with are at risk. And what I basically said is that there were 10 NPCs that the characters that were going into the war. They would roll 2d6 to determine how many of those NPCs were actually at risk from this war. So not necessarily dead, but put at risk. If they destroy the capital ship, that 2d6 goes down to 2d4. So they actually reduce the amount of risk to the NPCs that they know and love if they manage to take out the capital ship. But if they do that, then that one NPC in particular, is really at risk. And the defenses might get harder when they're going to their final base. So it gave these different options for them to decide how they were going to engage in this war, but still focusing on the characters and the jobs that they needed to do instead of doing a bunch of die rolling to determine like which ships blew up which other ships. that was going to be handled off screen, and instead it was focusing on the characters. Now, the other interesting bit about determining like which NPCs might be at risk. And again, this one I kind of stole from Mass Effect 2. When you run Mass Effect 2, the whole thing is actually like Seven Samurai. You're going around and you're picking up a bunch of NPCs to go with you on one big job. And so you pick up all these NPCs and you go on the big job. Depending on which NPCs you pick and which jobs you give them, put them at risk at the end. And you could lose a bunch of them. You might be able to save like one or two, or you could lose them all if you give them all the wrong jobs or you have bad relationships with them. So in the same way, I sort of wanted to have the option of the characters being able to choose which NPCs they wanted to offer advantages to. So by that first part, rolling either 2d4 to determine how many NPCs are at risk or 2d6 to determine how many are at risk, and then you roll to see which ones are at risk. You then give each one of them a death saving throw, a straight d20. You roll on a 10 or below, they die. On an 11 or above, they survive. But the characters can give something to the NPCs that they love to give them advantage on that check. So they don't know which ones are going to come up when you start rolling to see who's actually at risk. The players don't know which ones, but they can say like, have this suit of armor. We have this magical suit of armor. I want you to wear it. And because they're wearing that magical suit of armor, that character, that NPC will have advantage on the death save if their name comes up. Now, the other big question is when you're rolling. So let's say you roll 2d4 and let's say you roll the average of 5. So then you say, okay, we're going to roll across these 10 and we're going to roll 5 times to determine which NPCs are at risk. If you roll the same NPC multiple times, you still roll death saves multiple times for that NPC. Which means that they might be at double or triple risk if you roll the same one 3 times. They're going to have to make 3 death saves and survive all 3 in order to survive the battle. So this was a way that was kind of transparent and open. I talked about it with the players. I described how I was going to do it. I asked them if they were okay with that. When I talked to one player in particular, and I already knew this, there was one NPC we said we do not want to put them on the table. We like this NPC too much. It would be too bad, out of character. It'd be too devastating for this character to die. And we said that one gets a free pass. That one is not going to die. So that was a way to kind of negotiate and say, yeah, these other ones, it's really at risk. But this one NPC, it would just, it would ruin the game if this NPC died. And I said, okay, we don't want to ruin the game. So we're going to keep that NPC alive. But the rest of them we're going to roll. And we don't know. I don't know. We don't even know how it happened. Right now, the battle is still going on in the game. And at the end of the battle is when we're going to make these rolls and see who survived and who died. So that is kind of an interesting way, I thought, to handle sort of showing what the dangers and the perils of war in a way that's transparent and open, that the characters and the players have some agency to do things about it, but recognizing that it's largely happening off screen during this big battle. And that is having these different missions that the characters can take. One of the missions might reduce the number of NPCs that are at risk, i.e. if you roll 2d6 or 2d4, depending on whether or not you take out one particular group, that can lower the number of characters that are at risk. And in our case, the characters did not take that one, which means we are going to roll 2d6. And that is how many NPCs are at risk. And that could be a lot of NPCs. If we roll 10, that could be all of them, right? And then you roll, once you know the number of NPCs at risk, you roll on that list that number of times to see which NPCs have to make a death save. And if you roll the same character more than once, that NPC has to make multiple death saves. The death save is 10 or lower, they die, 11 or above, they succeed. But if the players have an option before you do all that, the players have an option to give them something. And it's usually something that matters to the characters. They can't give them just like crap in their bags. It's got to be something that the characters are making a sacrifice to do. It doesn't always have to be like giving them a magic item. It could be burning a high level spell slot. It could be they're using something. It could be using a lot of money. Something they have to make a sacrifice of some sort to help a character that they like get advantage on the save should they need to make that save. So I thought that was a really interesting tool. I wanted to share it with you. If you like this tip and you want to see more stuff like this, subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You'll get a weekly RPG related article sent directly to your inbox. It's absolutely free to sign up, and you'll get a free adventure generator PDF. You can also become a patron of Sly Flourish, getting access to all kinds of exclusive material, previews of videos like this, all kinds of different stuff you get for being a patron of Sly Flourish. Or you can pick up any of my books at the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links to all of those are down in the show notes below. Thank you all very much. Have a great day and get out there and play an RPG.